Tesla's Investor Day is only 2 days away at this point, and the internet is abuzz about the Model 2 coming out and how much it's going to cost and the bill of goods and all of that kind of stuff. But I'm going to make a bold prediction at the end of this video, and that is that we will see Taxi before 2 or Taxi before Tau, depending on how you want to name this thing. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So I want to talk about Pierre Ferragu's recent tweet thread on Twitter, which was excellent. It goes into a breakdown about the new Model 2 and about how much it's going to cost and all sorts of things that are really, really interesting. So it's really good for us to speculate on all that. But before I start, I want to actually get into a bit of numerology here. It sounds like a little bit bizarre, like we're becoming astrologers or something like that. But I was thinking about the fact that connecting the dots and, in consequence, many other people have started to think about the new Model 3, the Project Highland Model 3, as potentially being called the Model Pi and going on sale on 3/14 or Pi Day, something like that, right? 3.1415. Anyway, and that the next version, the Model 2, would actually be called the Model Tau. It's similar to 2. It also goes with the Greek numbering scheme and things like that, and that would come out on Tau Day, which is 6/28, which also happens to be Elon Musk's birthday. So yeah, it sounds like a lot of numerology and stuff. But the really interesting thing is that recently and very cryptically, Elon Musk just tweeted out the letter omega, the Greek letter omega. And if we're thinking about numbers like that, I started to think to myself, well, omega is the last letter in the Greek alphabet, so that would be sort of the car to end all cars or something. And pi and tau are both transcendental numbers. In other words, they don't repeat, they just go on infinitely. And so I thought to myself, I wonder if there is a transcendental number or something like that that's associated with omega. And as it turns out, there is, and it's called Chaitin's constant. I actually didn't know about this. I hope I'm pronouncing that reasonably correctly. Anyway, fascinatingly enough, this actually has to do with Alan Turing and the halting problem, which is one of the central issues of computer science. And it goes all the way back to the earliest days before computers even existed. Anyway, it's called the Chaitin, and again, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, maybe Chaitin. Omega number is the halting probability. It's a real number that, informally speaking, represents the probability that a randomly constructed program will halt. These numbers are formed from a construction due to Gregory Chaitin. Although there are infinitely many halting probabilities, one for each method of encoding programs, it is common to use the letter omega to refer to them as if there were only one. Because omega depends on the program encoding used, it is sometimes called Chaitin's construction when not referring to any specific encoding. And then we get to the transcendental part. Each halting probability is a normal and transcendental real number that is not computable, which means that there is no algorithm to compute its digits. So the really fascinating part about this is that it's connected to computer science and specifically to the halting problem, which means when you start a program, what is the probability that that program will actually cease or stop? And fascinatingly enough, if you kind of expand this out to the real world, you've got the factory thing, right? You've got a factory that's producing vehicles or something, and you could think about a computing device as sort of like a little factory for numbers. And essentially the question is this factory, is this electronic factory going to cease production or continue? And so I just thought it was a really interesting kind of overlap with what Tesla is doing. Of course, being a technology company, being at heart a computing company that also produces real things, you've got a factory that's sort of electronics, but also physical. And so you could sort of take this omega constant and put it in the real world and ask if there's a probability it would stop. Now, of course, there's also the element of omega being the last letter in the alphabet, which means it's the car to end all cars, right? So if it is the Robotaxi and it's called Model Omega or just Omega, I heard that they're going to get rid of models from now on. But anyway, if they call it that, then you're looking at something which is kind of cool because it's another transcendental number reference, but at the same time, it also is kind of like the car to end all cars. All right, enough of that numerology stuff. Probably that's totally wrong, but anyway, it'll be really cool if it does turn out to be right, but it's more than likely wrong. Anyway, I want to turn to Pierre Ferragu's tweets from yesterday. They are really amazing. If you don't follow Pierre online, you should definitely follow him on Twitter at least. He and his team are just an amazing group of analysts, and they really have their finger on the pulse of EVs and Tesla in particular. And what I want to do is skip down to the concluding remarks here real quick before I do the rest of it to show where he's getting these numbers. So he says, this is only a summary of our work. We analyzed the teardown of 7 different cars, analyzed in depth the financials of a dozen auto manufacturers, and built from the bottom a detailed cost structure for Model 3 and Model 2, or again, Model Tau or something like that. This was a lot of work and a lot of fun. So what did they discover from this fun work? Well, as he says, Model 2 is critical to the continued success of Tesla, and we should learn a lot more this week about it on Investor Day. Here is an overview of what we expect in 4 slides. Number 1, we expect Model 2 to be 15% shorter and 30% lighter and 25% smaller battery than Model 3. We looked at how ICE, or internal combustion engine compacts, compared to mid-size ICE sedans and extrapolated the comparison between Model 3 and ICE mid-size sedans to reach this conclusion. So if we blow this up a bit, you can see the difference that they're expecting between the Model 3 and the Model 2 and the delta, the change in size, weight, etc. And parentheses just being the classic financial thing for a negative number. So it could be minus 15%, but anyway, they put it in parentheses. So anyway, you're looking at going from about 4.7 meters long to about 4 meters long. This makes some sense in my mind that they would do something like that. I've always thought this would be a more compact car. I hope that what they'll do in consequence of that is make it more like a hatchback shape than like a traditional sedan shape, because a traditional sedan shrunk that much could actually feel rather small. So anyway, a hatchback would be a more usable configuration because it's, it's bigger at the top and it can open. And if you haven't seen my whole Model 2 design thing, I started working on this a couple of years ago at this point. I had the idea of being able to turn it into something that looked like a Cybertruck by seating people backwards so you could get more or less the hatchback amount of volume, but still have a very aerodynamic shape, because one of the problems with the hatchback is the back end is really, really stubby and it creates a lot of turbulence. So anyway, we'll see if my idea is correct or not. But anyway, shrinking this down makes a lot of sense. Making it more like a hatchback type of car makes a lot of sense as well. Although he doesn't talk about that specifically here. That would be the most logical form for a subcompact type of car. And then if we look at the weight reduction, we see a very significant amount of weight reduction, going from 1,600 kilos to 1,100 kilos, or a 30% reduction in weight. And if we go over to the right-hand column, you can see the current thing. You've got 3,500 pounds for the BMW 3, Honda Accord's 3,100 pounds. The Model 3 kind of comes in on the higher end of that, but again, it does have batteries at 3,552 pounds. And so they sort of work this calculation down to figure out, how much weight you would get rid of to go from a more luxurious type of car, more upscale mid-level car, to a lower scale subcompact type of car. And that's how they get their numbers. And then finally, and very crucially, you can see the battery capacity is going from 54 kilowatt hours for the Model 3. I believe that's the standard range single motor version, like the least, the one with the least amount of batteries, down to 40 kilowatt hours. That's pretty aggressive in my mind. I didn't think that they would get much below 50, but 40 seems to make sense. And that's a 25% reduction in batteries, which means that every 4 cars you produce, you get a free car in terms of batteries compared to producing a Model 3. So that's a huge savings. That's a gigantic amount more cars that you'll be able to produce with the same amount of kilowatt hours of batteries. As Pierre and team says, they will almost definitely be using LFP batteries. That's lithium iron phosphate. It gets rid of a lot of the very expensive, very ethically complex, difficult to source materials like manganese and cobalt and stuff like that. At that point, of course, lithium becomes the sort of limiting factor of this whole thing. Hi, Jordan. So anyway, there are limits to this, but they are much, much broader limits. You don't have these crazy chemicals that you have to find, rare earth minerals that you have to find, refine, and deal with. It's much more common materials. And also LFP batteries have been very rapidly advancing. The problem previously was that they had a very much lower energy density than NMC batteries. And so of course, for a car where you only have a limited amount of volume to put these things in and a limited amount of weight, you're not going to want to use these batteries because they would be too big and too energy inefficient. But over the years, they've become better and better, and they're actually getting rather close to NMC batteries in terms of energy density. And you can charge them up to 100%, not just 80% or something like that. And the charge discharge cycles, they don't tend to reduce in amount of charge they can hold. So there's a lot of advantages to LFP. They're not great in cold weather, but they have a huge number of other advantages attached to them. So the odds are, and they're much, much cheaper, of course, too. So the odds are very, very strong that this Tesla Model 2 is going to use LFP batteries exclusively. Turning to slide 2, Pierre says, we expect Model 2 to be 37% less expensive to build than Model 3. That's not quite half, but that's a huge, huge reduction in the cost to build this. Half of the difference derives directly from the car being smaller. So in other words, there's less stuff that you have to build. So you don't need as much stuff, you don't need as many batteries, etc. So you can reduce a lot of cost of goods for that. The other half is mostly from design, architecture, and manufacturing innovations. Hint, hint. This means a $21.6 thousand cost of goods at scale, including full self-driving hardware. So that means the car costs still over $20,000 to manufacture. He's going to project that it will cost about $25,000 to sell. I would imagine Tesla would, this is eventually also, but at least at the beginning, it's going to cost Tesla more than that to manufacture the vehicle because it won't be scaled up yet. They will probably start at, just under $30,000, maybe like $29,990 or something along those lines. But again, Pierre doesn't really talk about this, but pretty much everybody who's going to be in the market for a car like this is going to be eligible for the United States $7,500 tax credit and equivalent credits in other countries and stuff. So effectively, this car is going to cost a lot less than the sticker price of it. And then we have this slide that goes into a lot of detail about this. So you can look at, labor, depreciation, material costs, body and exterior, things like that. So you can see how all of this stuff reduces and reduces and reduces. And ultimately, the top line up here is that you save 37% on the cost overall of building this vehicle versus the current Tesla Model 3. Now, interestingly enough, he has $34.1 thousand for the Model 3. Sandy Monroe, I think, was closer to $38,000. So interestingly enough, even though, Elon has talked about 50% reduction and Pierre is only talking about 37% reduction, you're still looking at somewhere around a $20,000 car to manufacture. So it's interesting that we end up in about the same place, no matter whether you look at Sandy's teardown or whether you look at these guys' teardown. Next up, slide 3, Pierre says, full self-driving capable with superior range and performance with the screen and supercharging experiences of Tesla Model 2 will command a premium on the likes of a Corolla. Like Model 3 commands a premium over an Accord. It means gross margins above 20% versus mid-single digits for the Corolla. And here we can see this graphically. The Mini Cooper hardtop here is on the left. It would be considered kind of a luxury subcompact car. We have the Tesla Model 2 projected here, and then the Toyota Corolla, which is a very, very mass market, plain, really boring mass market car. The interesting thing here is if you look at the other materials, you look at $11,000 versus $10,000 for the Corolla, but Pierre is attributing this specifically to full self-driving hardware, which adds about $1,000 according to them to each individual car that's manufactured. And so it's really interesting that Tesla will put this into a car like this because it's a pretty significant chunk of the cost of building the car is adding, hardware 3, hardware 4, probably hardware 4 in the future with the cameras, and the sensor suite, and all of that kind of stuff. That actually adds a significant amount to the cost of a vehicle that's only going to cost $27,000 to $30,000 at a sale price. So, it is a significant amount of that cost of manufacture, cost of sales. But of course, what you're getting in return for that is a potential to sell some people on a subscription or potentially just buying it outright. But at $200 a month or whatever it happens to be, that's going to add enough money into the mix, especially as we start looking at full self-driving getting more and more capable. There will be people who will say, heck, it's only costing me $250 a month to finance this car, so I could afford another $200 a month or something like that. I could go to $450 a month or something and add full self-driving on top of that, which means that their profit margins go up. So you could consider this just being there for the ability to collect more data, which is very much true, but also Tesla has the potential to capture a lot of that extra $1,000. I mean, if somebody does that for just 1 year, they capture that $1,000 plus right back again. And of course, Pierre rightly notes that the total cost of ownership of the Model 2 is going to be less than the Corolla, even though the sticker price is higher. But again, if we're looking at a $27,000 sale price and the Corolla, I mean, $20,000 is pretty difficult. I went online and tried to buy a Corolla for that, and it was like $22,000 was about the least I could get it for. But just assuming that you can get a stripped down Corolla for 20 grand with the $7,500 tax credit in the United States, we're still looking at the sticker price of a Model 2 being less than that for a Corolla. And so that's pretty remarkable, right? At these prices, we'd be looking at an effective price of $19,500 for a Tesla Model 2 versus $20,000 for a Toyota Corolla. So who in the world would buy a Corolla that's a boring car that's stripped down, doesn't have anything, versus what will feel very luxurious compared to that, because Tesla just does not do cheap cars. They do inexpensive cars. They don't do cheap cars. And then finishing up, implications. Tesla can maintain a gross margin heading towards 30% for autos, with Model 2 and Full Self-Driving both increasing in the mix. Moreover, at $25,000 MSRP, Model 2 addresses 80% of the car market and paves the way for Tesla to exceed 12 million units and $400 billion in auto revenues in 2030. And again, let's remember, not just in the United States, but in Europe and also China, there are a whole bunch of EV tax credits. So if they can get to $25,000 retail price, the effective cost of this car is going to be sub $20,000. And there's no way that ICE vehicles can compete with that. If they can get a car like this below 20 grand effective pricing for people with the rebates and all of that kind of stuff, if they can do that, there's no ICE cars just can't compete with that. They can't go that low. So in other words, if and when Tesla does produce this Model 2 or Model Tau or whatever they call it, and they can get it to this sort of price and this sort of scale, they will own the world essentially. Which now brings me back to my introduction, and that is that there will be a taxi, a Robotaxi before Tau. I thought it was kind of a nice way to title this video too. Very, hopefully not clickbaity, because I'm actually going to talk about it at this point. But anyway, what I'm saying here is that this Model 2 is too good of a car. This is something that if Tesla announces this and they're like, it's even going to take a year to make this car, I don't know. You know, let's be optimistic and say that they can make this car in 1 year from right now. They're going to Osborne the heck out of their Model 3 in particular. So I think that what they're going to do instead at Investor Day, or if not Investor Day, they will do it shortly after that. I think Investor Day is the place that this will happen. But I think what we're going to see is the introduction of the Tesla Pi. In other words, it'll be the Model 3 refresh or something. We might not actually see that, but with the amount of castings and stuff that are now all over the place at Berlin and in Texas and stuff, I think that we are probably going to be introduced to the Tesla Pi, or whatever they call this thing, maybe just the Model 3 refresh, whatever that is. We will be introduced to that, and then we will also be introduced to the Robotaxi. Elon Musk will really, really hype the Robotaxi. He'll show off a tech demonstration. I watched Connecting the Dots' live stream this morning, which, by the way, really good job. It's really hard doing those things. You know, it was his first one, but I thought he did an excellent job and really made me think about things like drive-by-wire, brake-by-wire, all of that kind of stuff. Getting rid of fluids inside of the vehicle, like not having, you know, brake lines and steering lines and all of that kind of stuff. Doing battery management wirelessly, all of these kind of things, assuming that regulatory approval can happen. And this is something, again, if you talk about a Robotaxi, you can project this out several years. You can be like, we're going to release this in the future. And in the meantime, they can work on getting regulatory approval for this stuff. But if they can do things wirelessly, and the safety critical things are electronic rather than hydraulic, in other words, you don't have actual physical lines going to the brake systems and stuff. If we can get to that point, this is actually a car that could be manufactured for much, much less money, because a lot of the complexity of manufacture comes from, as Connecting the Dots again said, from the liquidy stuff. It's the messy things that you have to put into the brake lines, and you have to bleed the brake lines, and you have to test them and make sure they work. You have to do that for the steering, all of that kind of stuff. And there's also some danger things involved too, because when you have a steering column that actually has to extend into the traditional motor area of the vehicle, that thing is a very long impaling pike, essentially, right? So if you crash, there has to be all sorts of mitigating things to make that all fold up rather than stab you. And if you do it by wire instead, you've essentially got like the steering wheel with a little teeny column that goes into the dash, and then that's it. There's no gigantic long thing that's sticking out into the motor area of the vehicle that has to be dealt with. So all of that can be made much, much safer. and of course much, much cheaper. But here's the thing about a Robotaxi versus a Model Tau vehicle that they're going to sell to people, and that is that the cost really doesn't matter that much. I've said this before, people don't seem to want to listen to this. This is not a car you're selling to the public. It doesn't matter if you can shave an extra $1,000 off this car so that your profit margins are bigger, because if this car, let's say, costs $28,000 to produce rather than $27,000 to produce, but it lasts an extra 75,000 miles of Robotaxi, that's way more profit than that extra $1,000 it costs to build. So the cost to build the vehicle is not nearly as important as the efficiency of building that vehicle. Now, obviously, efficiency leads to lower costs, so it's kind of a virtuous cycle. But what I'm saying here is that Tesla doesn't have to focus on shaving every single penny off. What they really need to do is focus on making a Robotaxi as long-lived as possible. You want to make it, last 1,000,000 miles rather than 900,000 miles or something along those lines. And if you spend an extra $1,000 per car to do that, it doesn't matter, because over the lifespan of the car, it's just not going to make a difference. It's going to make so much profit that that extra little bit of money is not going to be a big deal. Now, the ability to manufacture these things in massive numbers, that actually does matter. And so obviously that will reduce the cost of the car. But what I'm saying here is that the focus is not on shaving every penny for the cost of manufacturing the vehicle. It's trying to make this vehicle as efficient as possible to produce in huge numbers. And one other aspect about that efficiency, Randy Kirk is on about this all the time, and I think I'll get on board with this too. And like I said, I made a prediction that we would see a demo of Optimus doing something useful in a factory at Investor Day in 2 days. And I think that what we will see is we will see Optimus being used in factory situations to help build this new Tesla Robotaxi, and of course the Model Tau as well. And of course, what will this Robotaxi be called? At least internally, maybe externally, it'll be called the Model Omega, or just the Omega, Tesla Omega. In other words, it will be the car to end all cars, because people won't need cars anymore because they have a Robotaxi. And given that Investor Day is all about huge mass scale, what better way to leverage the mass scale of manufacturing vehicles than to have a car that's being used 75 or 80% of the time like a taxi can be, versus 5 to 10% of the time that your personal vehicle is being used. That is a way of taking 5 cars off the road, more or less, probably more than that, but let's just say 5 cars off the road for every Robotaxi that's produced. So therefore, the letter Omega, the end of the Greek alphabet, really makes some decent sense to call this car. And again, it might just be called the Robotaxi, in public, but they also might call it Robotaxi or put an Omega on the back of the Robotaxi or something like that. Anyway, that's again back to the numerology thing, but I think that there's a very strong reason for them to introduce the Robotaxi now at Investor Day, because it's all about scale. You can talk about the future, you can talk about drive-by-wire, all of this kind of stuff, and not introduce the new Model 2, Model Tau, whatever you want to call it, not introduce that yet, because until the Robotaxi and the Model Tau are ready to sell, you really don't want to undercut the ability to sell the Model 3. So I think they'll hype the new Model 3 or Model Pi or whatever they want to call that. They will not talk about the Model 2, but they will talk about the Robotaxi. And when they do introduce the Model 2 or Model Tau, it's going to probably be something along the lines of what the Robotaxi is, with the addition of the accelerator, the brake, and the steering wheel. But if that stuff is all being done drive-by-wire, that's just something where you basically unplug it and put a different dashboard on the front of the vehicle, and it becomes a Robotaxi, so it can flip back and forth extremely easily between the two models. So will Tesla ever sell the Model Tau vehicle, or will they just go straight to Robotaxi? That could depend a little bit on the legal situation and how far they're able to get full self-driving and all that. I think if they don't quite get there in time, what they might do is they might potentially only lease the Model Tau. They might not actually sell it. So what that would do is you get a 3-year lease. You can put 30,000 miles on it, or 40,000, depending on the lease terms, something like that. And then Tesla gets that back at the end of that time. And if it all is sort of steer-by-wire, drive-by-wire, they can just remove the parts without having to do much of anything, just basically unplug them, put a new dashboard on, put a new floor mat under the whole thing, and it's a Robotaxi. You just take out that stuff super easily. You don't have to disconnect a bunch of mechanical things. So again, my thought is that they will talk about the Robotaxi. If they can't get full self-driving or the Robotaxi legal situation worked out fast enough, they'll introduce the Model Tau in the meantime, which will be the Robotaxi, but it will be the Robotaxi Robotaxi with the addition of drive-by-wire steering and acceleration and braking. And then they can just remove that when they want to move to the Robotaxi, which will smooth everything out and essentially allow them to build one car that serves both of these needs. And I think that's pretty genius. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it fun and interesting and thought-provoking. A lot of speculation. Again, it's not a question of being wrong, it's only a question of how wrong. And by the by, I'm wearing a Zion National Park t-shirt today because I'm going to Utah in just a few days. If you live in the Salt Lake City area and you want to go skiing with me, definitely let me know on Twitter. We can go hang out for a day. And in the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, please do like it so other people can find it, and also consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. Just a couple hundred away from 50,000 subscribers, so thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. And speaking of thanks, thank you all so much to my Patreon patrons. You all are wonderful. I truly do appreciate your support. And of course, if you want to join the team, just check out the link in the description. And if you're interested in a whole bunch of really cool merch, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. We have TeslaBot t-shirts, the Tesla meme t-shirt, Success is a Possible Outcome, 4680 battery cells. All of that stuff is on t-shirts, mugs, tumblers, and on and on. So check it out. And finally, don't forget, we are both Tesla and Amazon affiliates. If you look in the description, you can see how going shopping for a solar roof, a power wall, or anything on Amazon helps out the channel. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.